What's up, hobby friends, and welcome to my Necron Walker build guide. Now, unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to actually physically build a walker to show you. There are a lot of kits involved, and while I've been trying to source the parts on eBay and on various bit sellers websites, I haven't had much luck. Unfortunately, this build requires a lot of kits, and it's a little out of my price point. I don't need another walker, and I think the MSRP Canadian is over 300 to buy all the kits needed for this one model. So I'm going to walk you through with the physical model itself, and I'm going to use the instruction booklets to try and illustrate or to I guess, show you the parts that you're going to need, how you're going to modify them, and how they fit together. I'm going to be walking you through this build guide using 3 different models: my Command Barge, my Doomsday Ark, and my Tesseract Ark. The body for all 3 of these builds is identical. The only thing that really changes are the weapon arms, and I'll cover the differences between the 3 different kits on the weapon arms individually afterwards, but I'll start with the body because it's functionally the same for all of them. Now, to pull off this conversion, you're going to need quite a few kits. You're going to need a Doomsday Ark or Ghost Ark, which is the same kit. You're going to need a Triarch Stalker, an Annihilation Barge. You're going to need the Tombblade kit, the Wraith kit from the Necrons, as well as harnesses from the Space Marine drop pod. You'll also need some odds and ends and bits from the Necron Immortals, specifically the weapon barrels of their Ghost blasters. And then you're going to also need, if you can source it, a couple of extra room plates from I believe it's the Annihilation Barge kit. If you can't, you'll have to find alternative substitutes, but these are like little minor details, and they're not really important in the grand scheme of the build. So the place that I start with on the model is the hips. And you can see that with this rod piece right here. And from the back, it connects with this piece right here. I'm going to use a pencil to show. So this panel, this piece right here, joined with the hips and this. Now this is actually pulled from the spine of the main body of the Doomsday Ark or Ghost Ark. We're going to need 4 of these pieces, and each alternating piece, because the arms go left and right, we're going to remove every other arm connector. So that what we're going to be left with is 4 pieces stuck together with the 2 arms only on one side. And you'll see here, that's what it looks like when it's removed. To the sides of this, we're going to attach these 2 little decorative pieces lined up so that the curve of this arc sits more or less in line with where the arm used to be. And these are from the Triarch Stalker kit, I believe. It's 2 halves that fit together. We're just going to separate them and put them on the side. And this part right here is mainly to fill space. It felt a little blank when I was building the model, and so this sort of adds a bit more curveness and bulk, I guess, to the hips, especially where it joins to the leg. Similarly, on the back, connecting to these 2 decorative pieces, we're going to take the particle shredder from the Triarch Stalker kit. And this piece sort of looks like a bit of an exhaust vent. At least that's what I thought when I was adding it on. And to create the tip, I used the barrel ends from the Tesla carbines from the Tombblades, as well as the internal tip of the Ghost blaster. You can take it from the Tombblade or from the Immortal set, whichever or. I trimmed off the fins of the Ghost barrels, and I set those fins aside. We're going to use a lot of those elements in the future, but you can see them right here. So you want to save those pieces and collect them for this portion of the conversion. This spine element right here is from the Annihilation Barge, and I've relocated 2 of the engines to sit along the bottom of the spine. Using the fins that we cut off from the Ghost barrels, we add a bit of an attachment to the engines. So it looks like they're actually clamped on to the spine as opposed to just sitting on there. There's a bit of cutting involved to attach the Annihilation Barge's spine. This piece right here is also originally part of the Annihilation Barge subassembly, the part that actually is supposed to attach to here, but I've cut off certain parts of it to give it a flush cut right inside here. And then we're attaching this piece, the spinal piece, to one of the Triarch Stalker weapons. I believe it's the Heat Ray, but backwards. So I've taken this weapon, I've cut off the barrel, I've flipped it backwards, and I've glued it at this flush attachment point to attach the spine and the weapon barrel together. That entire subassembly is then glued on top of the hips to create this sort of shape, so that the top of this Ghost Ark rib arm is more or less level with the direction of the Heat Ray / spine assembly. So when we build a Triarch Stalker normally, this part right here is actually, I think, the torso or the main body of the Triarch Stalker that the cockpit for the pilot sits on top of. It has this piece that connects to the bottom, which mounts the weapon on the bottom of the Triarch Stalker. I'm using the weapon from the Triarch Stalker with the nub to take advantage of this mount and this body piece to create that natural connection and pivot point for the torso to allow me some posability in terms of the way I want the torso to twist and rotate. All I did was I took the Triarch Stalker's body and I flipped it backwards. So but we'll get to that when we cover the cockpit. The legs are primarily from the Triarch Stalker kit. This piece right here and this piece right here on the bottom. So the ball, this lower arm, this ball, and then this arc. It's one of the Triarch Stalker's rear legs. I simply trimmed off 2/3 of the talon to create the, I guess what would be the foot. I added barrels from the Gauss weapons taken from the Immortals, again with the fins cut off and saved for the engine block. This top part is the front Triarch Stalker legs. Again, I've cut off 2/3 of the talon and then use this to basically form the back of the hip and the butt, quote unquote, of its leg. It's not quite the butt, but in my mind, it sort of helps to anchor the leg, and it'll rotate and pivot as the leg is moving up and down. I would recommend not gluing this piece, not fixing it, until you've gotten your walker posed and this leg glued in. This way, because you can free pivot this, you can add a little more movement depending on how you glue the panel, right? So for example, on this leg, it's more or less straight up. I wanted this leg to be firmly planted, anchored, and so this is its position for stability. I imagine that as the leg picks up and strides, so either picking up, or as an example, in this one, arcing it further forward adds a bit more of that motion to the leg. And so I like keeping this piece unglued until we've gotten this entire leg assembly built and the walker posed. The mid part of the leg is actually the particle caster weapon from the Tomb Blade set. You can see on this one, I've added a covering or a plate. I believe this is from the Annihilation Barge, split in halves, and then I've added some of the veins from the Tomb Blade, as well as split Gauss barrels, again without the fins, for extra detailing. You'll have to trim the barrel of the weapon to get it to attach properly to the ball joint. For the foot, we're going to need the drop pod harness, as well as, for each foot, one Tomb Blade. Particularly the heat shield the engines, and then the guidance vanes. These talons, the toes of the foot, are actually taken from the Triarch Stalker's leg. So when I cut off the tips of these, I reuse the parts for the toes. We're going to build the Tomb Blade's heat shield and guidance vanes as normal, but we're not going to glue in the guidance vanes until, again, we have the foot posed. How you position these vanes, splayed out, like so, angled down if you want the foot lifting, or maybe you want them a little more flared out for extra stability. It all comes down to the specific posing of the walker. So I would recommend not gluing this panel and the guidance vanes until you've gotten your pose relatively set. The heat shield of the Tomb Blade essentially slots on top of the talon for the Triarch Stalker that we're using for the back of the foot, I guess the heel. It should fit relatively snug. The flares of the heat shield naturally sit in with the way that the talon has this hexagonal shape. And it'll feel quite natural the way it slips in. We add in the drop pod harness on the front to act as a sort of actuator and to fill in the space. And then we tuck in the toes. Building the hips and the legs is probably the trickiest part of this walker conversion because the entire pose of the model, all of its stability, rests on how you pose the legs in relation to the hips and how it's going to stand. My recommendation is to use a lot of blue tack and to do one leg at a time. Have some idea in your mind how you want the leg to, or how you want the walker to be positioned. Do you want it to be standing? Do you want it to be walking or striding forward, in which direction? And then build one leg at a time, starting with the leg that is going to be the most stable or the most planted. So in this case, for example, I built the right leg first because it's the one that's planted. When you attach the leg to the hip, you can pivot the spine and the hip assembly to either be more angled down like so, or a little more stable looking forward. I like a more sinister angle downward for the ones that are striding forward. It helps to reinforce that forward momentum, and it'll help act as a guide to how you want the leg glued in relation to the main body assembly. So once you've done one leg and you've attached it to the hips, you can flip it over, repeat, or pose the other leg. So when you build the top head of this model, you're going to take the body part or the undercarriage part of the Triarch Stalker, and you're actually going to clip off the ball and socket joint for where the front mandibles actually mount. Use a very, very sharp blade for this. You want the cut to be as clean as possible because we're going to take that ball and socket mount and we're actually going to attach it to the hips like so, and then use the Triarch Stalker's mandibles as a sort of like T-Rex manipulation arm on the bottom. So the way I envisioned this model originally, these arms were both gun arms, like you see here. And the way that it would manipulate things up close would be with these little T-Rex arms, these little clamps. Of course, as I built more of these models and I realized I wanted hands, I was able to build this with inspiration from Rumpelmaster, who actually has a lot of cool Necron conversions as well. Built this arm assembly for something a little more dexterous and more combat-oriented. So we've gotten the Triarch Stalker undercarriage assembly. Once we've gotten the ball and socket mount for the mandibles clipped off, we're going to glue this piece together, making sure to attach the middle socket receivers for the Triarch Stalker leg. So we're not going to do anything on the front or the back, or front and back as it were, as we're using them. But when you go to build this for the Triarch Stalker, you need to insert these before you put the halves together to receive the legs. And this will be for the arms. To fill these holes, we're using the Ghost barrels from the Necron Immortals, and we're going to need 4 of them. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And then to add a bit more detail to the back, we're going to take some of our extra Ghost barrel fins, and we're just going to glue them back to add a bit more, to add another layering detail to them. You don't have to do this. It's not super noticeable. You can put something else there. I just felt it looked a little empty on the back. This orb is also from the Triarch Stalker kit, and it takes the tailpiece with this little vein or hook thing. I've cut this vein hook backwards, I've flipped the piece, and then I've glued this orb to create the eye socket, which fits in perfectly, as that's where the tail is supposed to be. And then we take this armor plate and put it on top to create the eyeliner hood of the optical lens. These 2 plates are also from the Triarch Stalker kit. They are the cockpit armor plates that go on the side. I've simply removed the middle panel that goes in between them, and I've glued them to create that smooth curve. You can actually see, if you look carefully, that there is a V right here, because the pieces aren't actually supposed to be this angular. These fins are supposed to sit level and flush. It's just the way I've attached them, they've angled in. When you're building this kit, I recommend keeping this entire torso assembly, starting from this joint all the way through, separate. And that way you can paint this entire spine, the hips and all the legs, get into all the little areas over here. And same with the torso. You can get into all these little areas here, all the undersides, without all of this getting in the way, and then you can attach it all afterwards once you've finished painting the model. So a bunch of the Necron kits, specifically the Triarch Stalker and the Annihilation Barge, they come with these little block runes or glyphs, are from a variety of different parts and pieces. I've used them to cap these cut-off talons. You only really get 1 per kit, and although the Doomsday Ark does come with 2 of them that attaches to the side of the engine mount, that one's a little too big for this. So you're going to have to source a couple of extra of these because you need 2 per hip. Alternatively, you can do something else. Fill it with some other detail. I don't know how I got it. I think I eBayed these when I originally built the kit, and I was able to get a whole bunch of them. And I think they look nicer. They've got that angled hexagonal pattern, just like the talons do, and the runes add a bit of detail to fill that blank space there. But again, this part is not as important. You can cap it however you want. When we build the arms, we're again using parts from the Triarch Stalker. So if we're building a gun arm like this, you can see I've literally just taken the entire Triarch Stalker arm. I've cut off the lower 2/3 of the talon, which ends up being used for the toe. This is the back half of the Annihilation Barge's Tesla Destructor. And then I've attached, I believe this is from the Triarch Stalker. So I had a bunch of them. I wanted to create a different weapon for my command barge to represent its Gauss cannon. Or you can use the full barrels from the Tesla Destructor if you wanted to. Or in this case as well, just build the dual Gauss cannon as you would from the Triarch Stalker. And then there's a bar in between that connects both weapons. We just glue the talon onto the weapon, onto that bar, and then we hide it with this little panel. And this, I believe, is also from the Annihilation Barge. And that just attaches to the ball and socket as you would the Triarch Stalker leg, and that's pretty easy. To do the gun arm for both the Doomsday Ark and the Tesseract Ark, you're either going to use the ball from the Triarch Stalker leg and remove everything else, like I did here, or you'll take part of the leg and cut it in half. It depends on how you want the weapon to mount to the arm. You have a lot of creativity here. You don't have to mass produce it identically, and I just used the parts on hand and sort of finagled it. My Tesseract Arcs, because these weapons, so my Tesseract Arcs, because I built one of these first, and didn't have all of these extra pieces from Tomb Blades to build a second Tesseract cannon the same way, I had to change up the way I did the mount. But you're already converting it. Go to town, have fun with it. You can change up how this weapon mounts to the body. Really what's important is you just create some sort of ball and socket like join to connect it. So here I've used a circular piece that will receive the Triarch Stalker ball. Whereas in this instance, I've taken pretty much the top back end of a Triarch Stalker leg. So more or less a piece like this. And I just cut it right down here. Just halfway. This gun comes from the Seraptek heavy construct from Forgeworld. Thankfully, you're able to buy these guns separately. So I was able to pick up a couple of extra of these to use as my long barrel Doomsday cannons. And you can see on the external side that this gun has a receiver. Now, normally there's, I think, a bunch of hoses and cables that connect parts of this weapon together. I didn't glue those together because they had a lot of mold lines that I just couldn't remove from the resin kit. And instead, I used that as the receiver for the arm. Honestly, I couldn't tell you where parts came from. I know this is the Doomsday Ark barrel. I know these are extra veins and attachments from the Tomb Blades. I know these are from the Annihilation Barge throne. I believe these are from the Triarch Stalker. It's a bunch of extra barrels and stuff, and cabling, and then Triarch Stalker. Not quite sure what this centerpiece was, but I really needed something to extend the barrel, and I'd already picked up a lot of Necron kits at this point, so I was sort of just finagling. But again, this is one of those unimportant pieces because it's not part of the core of the model. You can really have fun with the way you design these weapons and flex a bit of that creativity. Like I said, I have 2 of these Tesseract arcs, and the barrels on them aren't identical. So you can see how this barrel, it maintains some of the same design principles. We've got the singularity chamber, this time on the back end as opposed to the middle. We keep the original Doomsday cannon, and then we also, again, use the throne mounts sort of as focusing rods from the Annihilation Barge. This structure right here, this core structure, and this piece right here have changed, but because, in my mind, it keeps some of these similar elements, the singularity chamber and these focusing rods and the big barrel. Even though they're slightly different, you can tell that they're essentially the same gun. Functionally, that they're going to do the exact same thing. For the combat arm for my command barge, I actually drew inspiration for this part of the conversion from another prolific converter called Rumpelmaster on Instagram. If you don't follow his page, I recommend you check him out. He's got a lot of great conversions and some very, very cool stuff in there. I needed a combat arm with a bit of dexterity to it, and this is, the hand, I think, is the same as what Rumpelmaster does, although I've changed up the rest of it. So this forearm right here is a Tesla rifle. You can grab it from the Immortal set, or you can grab it from the Tomb Blade set, and we've just extended it a touch and attached it to the ball of the Triarch Stalker leg. To create the hand is a little tricky. This piece right here is one of the double talons from the Wraith kit, and we've glued on top of that an armor plate, also from the Wraith kit. This armor plate starts off joined. We've cut off the middle, and we've separated them, attached them on both sides. This vein is one of the guidance veins from the Tomb Blade kit that I've trimmed down to almost half its size to attach to this ball right here. So this ball is also part of the ball and socket of this Wraith double talon. These fingers are Wraith talons, To attach them to this fin, basically the palm of the hand, we used 2 immortal Ghost barrels cut in half. So you're taking 2 barrels, you're cutting them in half to give you 4 cylinders, and we're going to glue them along the length of the fin, spaced evenly to give you the mounts for the 4 fingers. The thumb is very much the same thing. It's a Wraith Talon, one of the smaller ones. You'll note that these are the long 3-length ones. This is a 2-length one. So if you actually look at our thumb, our human hand, right? Our thumb has 2 joints because it's 1, 2. The third one for the thumb is actually in here, but because we have this this skin and tendon and tissue and muscle all here joining it, you don't actually get to see it. This part of the thumb, equivalent to this part of the finger, is actually hidden. So if you look at the our thumb compared to this thumb, we're going to have this part right here, this part right here, this part right here. Conversely, for the fingers, we have the 3 joints. This part is this, this is this, this is this. Now, I was lazy with this. I sort of Edward Scissorhands hands. They're not really closed. They don't do this. They're sort of just stuck like this, sort of like a slashing motion. But you can see with this thumb, what I did was I cut these at the joints, and I shaved it in to create a bevel or a cut that allowed this piece to angle more. So if you really want to do a little more with the fingers, you can do the same thing. You can trim these sections right here and change the angle of that bevel to create more of a curl in the fingers if you so chose. Just be careful that when you do this, you're actually making the fingers a little more fragile, which for a gaming piece might be an issue because the fingers might break off. So if you do that, I do recommend pinning them. To flush out the palm of the hand, I took a Wraith faceplate and glued it on. And that also helps to hide some of the finger joints back here while adding a bit of beef. To do the arm on the Doomsday Ark, it's the exact same process. The only difference is, so this gun arm is actually from the Immortals. You can tell because there is no ball and socket receiver on one side. My Ghost Ark and Doomsday Ark use Ghost barrels from the Toonblade kit, which do have the ball and socket joint, because the way I do my my Ghost flux array is to actually use this double barrel Ghost cannon or Ghost rifle from the Doomsday Ark kit glued together to act like a sort of wrist-mounted gun. I know that it's supposed to be a 10-barreled weapon, but the army is really converted. It's representative, and you can clearly see it's a Ghost weapon. So he has some sort of Ghost rifled weapon on his wrist for his Ghost array, and then he has the big cannon for the Doomsday cannon. So creating this wrist weapon is fairly straightforward. We take the ball and socket from the Toonblade, we trim where we connect so we're just left with the ball, and then we take 2 guns from the Ghost Ark. We trim the tops until they fit almost flush enough to line up with a Immortal Ghost rifle barrel. So I recommend using sandpaper or a modeling file to just cut down and trim down this part right here until they fit flush, and you're going to be doing a lot of dry fitting. Building my Ghost Ark conversion is very much the same as my smaller Doomsday Ark, Tesseract Arks, and Command Barge. It's very much the same design ethos or the same methodology. It just, because it's a bigger conversion, I had to swap around the parts I used and which parts I'm using where. Again, you're going to need a Doomsday Ark or Ghost Ark. You're going to need a Triarch Stalker. You're going to need 2 Toonblades. And you're actually going to need 2 Wraith boxes for this one conversion, as well as the legs from a Dunecrawler, drop pod harnesses, and then an extra spine from a Doomsday Ark or Ghost Ark. So the hips are built the exact same way, using the spine of the Ghost Ark or Doomsday Ark. The only exception is instead of using 4 connectors, we use 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Removing all of the ribs from one side and keeping 2 spaced out. So the extra one in between has the rib removed, and we've widened the spacing of this right here for these 2 ribs. We've once again used some extra pieces from the Triarch stock to round out the sides of the hips and to add a bit more girth or weight to it. To create the spine and connection assembly, we're again using the heat ray from the Triarch stock turned backwards and the barrel removed. But instead, we're attaching it to the spines from the Ghost Ark or Doomsday Ark. You're going to need 2 of them put together, and you're going to have to cut and trim down these energy balls to get them to fit flush. Same thing with the, there's a cylinder, I don't know if you can see it. This cylinder that would connect to the spine has to be trimmed down on the inside on both halves so that it fits flush. We add a couple of armor plating and canopy details, I believe from the Annihilation Barge, to help hide the assembly, and then that attaches to the hips much like the other walker, keeping the nub on top for the torso. I'm not going to cover building the torso or the upper head of this because it's built along with the arms identically to the other walkers. We just built 2 arms with hands and 2 wrist-mounted Ghost Arks, or Gauss rifle assemblies, instead of 1 big gun for this guy. This dead Necron is a combination of a Necron warrior, repositioned arms. I've cut the 4 arms off of one. I've removed the gun off of the gun hand. And then the legs, I just cut off a bit of the foot to represent that he's very damaged. So the idea is that this guy scoops up dead Necron warriors from the battlefield, and he either brings it to the back or they attach to these arm assemblies, or these drones come and grab them and carry them back to repair them. The legs of this walker are, again, almost identically built to the smaller walkers, with the exception of this join right here. Now, unfortunately, you can see from the way that this is no longer perfectly straight, this model has broken and shattered quite a few times, both in transit and just being knocked off the table. Over the course of time through repairing it, I've had to cut, glue, and repeat this so many times that it no longer lines up properly. If I were to build this walker again, I recommend filling, because these parts are hollow. Fill them with putty or Sculpey, something, milliput. Make sure that this piece is solid, and then pin this entire assembly right through, all the way. This part is the most fragile part of the model because you can see it wobbles a lot, and this right here is a structural weak point. So if I were to ever build this conversion again, that's one thing I would correct. To create an extended leg, this is the Tesla carbine from the Immortal kit, as well as the particle caster from the Tomb Blades, just cutting the barrel off, attaching them along the length. So because this Ghost Ark doesn't have a spine that goes all the way down to mount an engine assembly, what I did instead was I took 2 of the small engines from the Ghost Ark, or Doomsday Ark, and attached them to the back, symmetrically on the inside of these ribs. And then I also attached a couple of these bits. I forget where exactly they're from. They're from one of the either Annihilation Barge, Tomb Blade, or Triarch stock kit. Just put them on there for a little extra booster. Mandibles from the Triarch Stalker, much like the other kits. To build this entire back assembly takes a bit of work. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take the 4 legs from the Dunecrawler, and I trimmed off all the rivets. There's no rivets in the Necron range at all, and I felt that they would look out of place from being from an Imperial vehicle. I trimmed those, and I set those aside. To build this spine that sandwiches in between these 2 pieces, we're taking a combination of these leg assemblies and these round parts also from the Dunecrawler, and we're just going to one by one piece them together, creating the curve to attach in. I did a lot of dry fitting on this piece right here to make sure that as I was gluing them, they fit the curve of this spine perfectly. From there, you're just attaching these Dunecrawler legs. I've laid them out alternating left, right, left, right, left, right, just to give myself a little more space. Otherwise, you're going to have to reposition these arms, angled more down or up to give yourself space. These warriors are just from the repairing warriors from the Ghost Ark. You build them as normal, but you attach the assembly to Wraith double talons with the front 2/3 cut off. And these in turn are glued into the Dunecrawler legs. I recommend attaching these last. Get the entire assembly built. Get the entire Ghost Ark standing so that when you glue these on, you can position them, 1, so that they don't impact or bump into each other, but also 2, so that you can level them. You can see that I've glued these in so that no matter how this arm is rotating or bending, these warriors are gyroscopically leveled to the terrain. To save a bit of height, and because this piece tends to break off a lot, this spine is very tiny, I did use 2 magnets to just attach this. It makes it easier for storing, for transporting. It saves me about 2.5 inches in my case, which is nice, and I don't have to worry about this constantly breaking off. So both drones on the arm and on the assembly are built the same way. Now, these are essentially the Wraith torsos. Normally they mount like this. So you have, this is the underside, 2 more pieces on the bottom, and then the armor plates curve on top. So I've gotten rid of the armor plates. I've cut the bottom part of this torso, and then I've attached the little radar dish from the Tomb Blade, cutting out the middle to create a bit of a seamless engine exhaust port, or whatever this thing is in the back. And then you just build the arms as normal. Sort of like he's floating along like a sentinel from the Matrix. So this one, he's grabbing onto a warrior. And this one he's repairing the warrior that's attached to the assembly. This one I posed to be crawling along the arm like he's going to go pick up this warrior. The boosters on the bottom are plasticard tubes. These ones telescope into each other, so I just cut the appropriate length, glue them together, and attach them in a 2x3 formation on the bottom. You can see the same on this one with a 2x3 formation, as well as a little radar dish vane on the back. So again, very expensive walkers. I think when you do it the first time, it's a very complicated conversion. But once you've done it the first time, it's very easy to mass produce. The hardest part and the most challenging part, I think, is actually sourcing the bits to make them in the first place without having to buy the full kits. So if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe for more weekly content. You can also follow my Instagram @SirJohnTheHoe for daily updates on my hobby projects. Until next time, happy hobbying.